This is the Panasonic S5 Mark II, and it might just be the Panasonic camera that everyone has been waiting for. It has a new sensor, new engine, new phase detect autofocus system, higher resolution record modes, and a whole lot more. We're going to break down and test each of those areas in turn, but my main takeaway from trying this out for a few days, which I wanted to start this video with, is that this is Panasonic back on their top form. This is an incredibly feature-rich camera designed to be practical and convenient at a price point that offers pretty incredible value for money. There is a lot to cover here, so let's just make our way through it section by section. Now, it's not normally a subject I start with, but I think it's justified here. Every Panasonic launch for the last few years has been met with cries of, please just give us a phase detect autofocus system. Their previous contrast-based AF system was good for a contrast system, but because it was contrast-based, it hunted when it was tracking a subject. And this new phase detect hybrid system does none of that. It's important though for me to get across from a technology point of view that this is not just throwing out all of their hard work in pushing that contrast-based AF system forwards. It's just now adding the phase detect technology to that same system, enabling the camera to sense depth, which is the really important part that is just so crucial for video autofocus tracking. Here are some of our tests. S5 on the left, S5 Mark II on the right. And as I lean forwards and backwards in my chair, the difference is day and night obvious. The S5 hunts a lot and flickers in the background, while the S5 Mark II performs really quite well. This is really obvious when we crop me out of the frame entirely and just focus on the bokeh in the background. This makes the flickering on the original S5 really obvious. We also explored how the camera behaved in different picture profiles as well, because on the S5 you definitely got better autofocus performance in contrastier picture profiles compared to when you were using a log format. Here the difference is much smaller. As you can see, it is working well in both log and in Cinelike D. However, the Cinelike D does seem to perform slightly better, so there is still a slight difference. Perhaps this is due to the contrast side of the hybrid system having the same performance as we saw on the original S5, but the addition of that phase technology has made that difference, which was quite noticeable on the S5, really minimal here on the S5 Mark II. So we're all pretty happy over here at ProAV. The days of compromising on autofocus performance by choosing a Panasonic camera are just now well and truly behind us. With the S5 Mark II, Panasonic have raised their autofocus performance up to meet the Canon and Sony cameras in the world and leveled that playing field, which I am incredibly happy to finally see. This is an autofocus system that you should definitely be able to really rely on for professional video work. So the S5 Mark II isn't using the same sensor as the S5 before it. It is a completely new sensor and a completely new processing engine as well. Panasonic say it has 14 plus stops of dynamic range, and it also has a dual native ISO, which is fairly rare to see at this price point from other brands. In Vlog, the native ISOs are 640 and 4000, and in regular picture profiles it's 100 and 640. The Vlog recording is a full Vlog, not the Vlog Lite, and it also uses the full V-gamut color space as well. I have the original S5 here with me as well, so let's put them side by side and do some proper over and under tests to see what some of the differences are, as that's obviously going to be the main talking point here. S5 on the left, S5 Mark II on the right. The first thing you notice is the new Mark II has much nicer skin tones in my opinion. This is graded using a color space transform in Resolve with some exposure correction beforehand to correct each exposure back to normal. The skin tones and actually just the overall colors on the Mark II stay consistently nicer, I think. Up to 4 stops over, both cameras perform fantastically, and at 5 stops over, they both break with very similar clipping on both the original and the Mark II. So I would expect them to have both the same amount of highlight exposure potential. However, when we go underexposed, we start to see much more difference. The original desaturates with strong magenta noise blocks, while the Mark II keeps its colour but has very strong green noise blocks. Now the original was in its 422 H.264 codec, while the Mark II is in its 420 H.265 codec because we used the 6K recording mode. So that could be why we're seeing this difference, but it is interesting to note. As for which does better, well, I think at 1 and 2 stops under, the Mark II definitely looks better because it keeps that overall saturation level and hasn't introduced too much of that extreme chroma noise yet. But once we go past that point, they look pretty similar, with perhaps the original looking slightly better. But really, all cameras look pretty bad by this point though, so it kinda doesn't really matter. Overall here, I think the main takeaway is that we shouldn't expect too much difference in image quality with the Mark II over the Mark I, apart from in your colours and skin tones. However, the S5 always performed well in any comparisons we did, so this is no bad thing. Before we move on to recording modes, let's first quickly look at our high ISO tests and how it compares to the S5. They both have the same native ISOs of 640 and 4000 when in Vlog, and the noise performance seems similar, even up at 12,800 ISO. Once you get as high as 25,600 though, the Mark I started to go green, while the new Mark II keeps its colour nicely. The headline new recording modes on the S5 Mark II are the 6K options. Using the full width of the sensor, you can record 6K in either DCI 17:9 or 16:9 or even 3:2 aspect ratios. This 3:2 mode will be great for anamorphic users, but also for cropping for social media. Crop off the top for regular video, crop off the sides for vertical video. It helps you get better framing for vertical video, because if you just crop a vertical segment out of a regular 16:9 video, your framing will often feel very tight and cramped. You don't have to use those 6K modes though. You can also use 4K DCI or UHD up to 30p or HD up to 240p. Crop into APS-C and you can get up to 60p in 4K. We tried the 6K and 4K 25p side by side to see the differences, and as you can see, the 6K is definitely sharper and more detailed. Interestingly, the 4K from the original S5 is slightly sharper than the 4K from the S5 Mark II, but not as detailed as the 6K. So the original S5 does seem to be doing a better job of downsampling the sensor down to 4K. However, to be honest, for the file size differences between the 6K and 4K modes, I would just be using the 6K. It's 200 megabits a second compared to 150 when in 4K, which is well worth it for the extra quality in my opinion. This is not one of those large and bloated and difficult to work with formats just because it's 6K. If you have any modern computer, like any of the Macs with an M1 or an M2 chip inside for example, this footage will edit perfectly for you. All of these options can record for an unlimited amount of time because of their new hidden fan design. This is really clever. Rather than bolting a fan onto the back like they did with the GH6 or S1H or Canon did with the R5C, they've built the cooling fan into the top viewfinder section. The intake vent is tucked away under the logo at the front, and the hot air comes out either side by the dials. So you notice it a lot less than you do when it's on the back, as that can really make the whole camera feel much thicker and bulkier. You don't really notice this at all. All record modes in the camera are based around long op compression, and everything is 10-bit. Every mode can be 420 10-bit, and basically everything apart from the 6K modes can use 422 10-bit. Once we did some digging though, we noticed that everything in that 422 10-bit is using H.264, and everything in 420 10-bit is using H.265, even though they both use the same data rate. So this is a bit strange because it leaves us wondering which one has the best image quality, the more color information of the 422 10-bit or the more efficient compression of using H.265 even though it's 420. Here is the two side by side, and as you can see the sharpness and detail looks identical. If we introduce just a ridiculous grade in order to try and break them, we can still barely see any difference, especially in graduated areas from one colour to the other, which is somewhere where you would expect to see a difference. But at the end of the day, both are 10-bit, so there isn't that much extra colour information. Perhaps in green screen or chroma keying you may see something, but here I don't really. There are a few other new features Panasonic have included here as well. The first is a new image stabilization algorithm, which they're calling Active IS in the presentation that we received, but in the camera menus nothing has actually really changed. It's just part of the regular IBIS system. Panasonic say though that this is aimed at shooting video while walking handheld. Apparently it predicts those movements and it compensates for them around 200% better than the S5 did. And the S5 was already pretty good with its IBIS. You know, this is a hard thing to really test out scientifically in a video like this, but we did some walking shots here in the showroom handheld, which you can see here, and you know, it does perform very well. Panasonic has always had one of the better IBIS systems in the industry, and any improvements to an already great system, you know, they're always welcome. They also have a new way of working with LUTs called real-time LUT. This is essentially just a cleverer way of burning in a LUT while recording. You can load in up to 10 LUTs now as .vlt or .cube files, which is an increase over the 4 slots we got before. Then you can use them as your view assist on your monitor, just like before, or you can burn them into your footage with real-time LUT. You find this in the photo style menu. It starts off as Vlog, and then you choose the LUT that you want, it applies it, and you're now recording that LUT over log instead of just recording log. So it's essentially a more customizable way of giving you a quick turnaround Rec 709 profile which looks good, like Canon have done with YDR and Sony have done with their Cinetone. Interestingly, you can also apply it to other profiles like Cine D, so I'm sure we'll see a huge amount of LUTs from all kinds being made for this camera to tweak the image in all kinds of different ways, which is really quite exciting. There are also some physical changes. The screen is the same flip-out screen as on the S5, but the OLED viewfinder has had a quality bump up to 3.6 million dots. The HDMI port is now a full-size one. It can't output RAW at launch, but that is coming in a firmware update, although it will require their paid SFU2 license upgrade, unfortunately. The card slots are both now the same speed, taking UHS 2 SD cards, and we now get 4-channel audio via the XLR1 adapter, just like we saw on the GH6. Then, if all of that wasn't enough for us to talk about here, they've also announced an X version, the S5 Mark II X, which will be available in May and about £300 more expensive than the regular model. Now, we don't know a huge amount about this camera yet, but I'll talk more about my thoughts on it in its own up-to-speed video, which I'll put a link to in the comments of this video. But essentially, it's going to be the same camera as this, but adding a few pro video features like all-eye recording, 5.8K ProRes over the USB-C port, RAW out over the HDMI without that paid license, and some streaming and tethering options. Plus a really nice blacked out finish to the camera as well, which is an interesting move and it gives it quite a unique look. So, all in all, the S5 Mark II is a really fascinating camera. It improves upon everything which we loved about the original S5, which I always said would be one of my favourite cameras on the market if it only had phase detect autofocus. Well, now the Mark II has it. And just that one change makes this such a more well-rounded professional tool, let alone all the other improvements to the camera as well. This is a lot of camera, but it sits as one of the most affordable modern full-frame cameras on the market, which makes this one of the best value for money options which we sell. If you want to order one for yourself, of course, just head over to provi.co.uk and let me know what you think down in the comment section. Can you think of a camera on the market right now that offers quite so much value for money as this one does? Let me know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.